So, quick introduction for Catherine. So, Catherine is Assistant Professor of Musicology and Music Industry at the UCLA Herb Albert School of Music. She earned her doctorate in ethnomusicology from New York University in 2019, with an ethnographic account of digital pitch correction software and its development and use in the US top 40 in hip hop, which involved talking to people on the East Coast, on the West Coast, in Germany, artists, developers, software engineers, the whole thing. Building on this work, she's identified a range of creative and political issues arising from these and other tools of music production, with implications for gender, race, evangelical megachurches, and in particular, the centrality of emotion in music, themes which she's gone on to explore in other publications. I'd strongly recommend looking at her chapter in the Creative Tools book, which unpicks a whole bunch of these issues. Catherine's also a singer, songwriter, and performer under the name Keniston. And so over to Catherine.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. I could not have imagined how well, I mean, Michael and I met before, but I couldn't have imagined how well these talks would go together. And I think actually at the end, we'll have some work to do in kind of like untangling emotion and expression, because I have some ideas about what differentiates those, but I was really grateful to be prompted to think about it more. So I'll just share my screen now. Here we go. So this today is, I'm trying something a little bit different. So I'm grateful to everyone for allowing me to sort of develop this metaphor today and just sort of see how it works. And yeah, I'll just take it away. Okay. In 2023, the very small software company Fabler MB released its one and only product, the app Fabler. Fabler allows a user to clone their voice for the purposes of storytelling and reading to their children. Noting that parents are busy and tired, which they are, Fabler offers to help parents who don't have time or simply don't like reading aloud lift themselves out of the reading rut. But even more importantly, by cloning their voices and allowing the AI model to do the heavy lifting of creativity and engagement, it's promised that they can offer their children a tool of emotional regulation and development. Parents' clone voices might even do a better job because they will not succumb to the deflation of monotony or the resentment of not getting to finish your coffee while it's hot, which is one of the examples they give for the reason you might want to use it. The app's developers partnered with Resemble AI, the California-based software outfit dedicated to creating what they call high-quality synthetic voices that authentically capture human emotion. Resemble is currently featuring Fabler on its homepage as one of its case studies. Though Fabler does not seem to be doing particularly well and so far has a small number of downloads and no reviews, Resemble presents it as a stream of thinking here, like how they got to where they got, and a template for imagining other uses to which their AI voice capabilities might be put. So I'll just play you a clip of my own Fabler voice, which I had to use a workaround to record, but here it is.
Once upon a time, there were 3 little pigs who lived with their mother in a cozy home. They spent their days playing, eating, and sleeping, and the mother pig took care of them with love and dedication. One day, the pigs decided that they're all grown up and it's time to leave the nest. Their mom said, "My dear children, I love you so much. Please be careful. Promise you would stay away from danger, like wolves and foxes. You should build strong homes to be safe." The little pigs were excited and scared at the same time, but they hugged their mother goodbye and set out on their journey.
Okay, so that is supposed to be convincing. I think that my son would not, it wouldn't work for, he would be interested in some other dimensions of that, but I don't know if he would be emotionally regulated by my cloned voice. In any case, the way that that Resemble is offering an idea of what these things, the things that it might do, if we can infer from the Fabler partnership, have a lot more to do with mitigating discomfort and undesirable demands on your life, coupled with a strong emphasis on the purported optimization of emotional outcomes that go along with that mitigation. The imagined ease the product promises translates into an improved emotional landscape, which, as I pursue in this talk, is significantly, if not entirely, material. So today I posit emotion at the center of music technologies and argue that emotion is a foundational layer of software design. I entertain the possibility that software is not developed to help us do things, but instead to help us feel and not feel things. As sociologist Eduardo Bonilla Silva has theorized, emotions are not merely abstract and personal, they are collective and consequential. Emotions are racialized, material, and as he emphasizes, rational. By claiming that emotions are rational, meaning that they contribute to different subject groups' material and psychic well-being, he untethers rationality from its strictly economic and logical associations and allows for a broader framing in which emotional worlds, hierarchies, and logics are just as fiercely maintained as economic ones. Working with cultural theorist Sarah Ahmed, he offers the reminder that emotions do things. She theorizes affective economies where feelings do not reside in subjects or objects, but are produced as effects of circulation. The circulation of objects allows us to think about the sociality of emotion, and that's a framing I come back to over and over again. Very productive for me. So taking emotions in these formulations seriously, I suggest that we need to attend to the ways sound software tools much more greatly offer a palliative imagining of the reorganization of sonic social relations than they innovate outcomes, and to the ways that they figure social and material problems that precede them. So I suggest a reorientation of the questions we ask to determine what it takes for software to thrive, so to speak. And in this, I find the metaphor of substrate to be productive. So this I just took from like a biology study textbook for US high school students. Substrate means the surface on which something grows or the substance on which an enzyme acts. So to position emotion as software as substrate, and in this diagram, software would be the gray blob and then emotion would be coming in these different colors. But as you see, they're both changed in their texture, color, shape through the interaction with each other. So in this positioning, I want to point to the material, economic, and social configurations that arise through and materialize in emotional logics and which drive the development of software tools. Substrate also evokes surface, and I like this connection because I don't want to imply that emotion is some kind of fetishized interiority, but rather a kind of interface of operation. The figure of surface allows for an alignment with thought and theory that argues that there is no such thing in itself that lurks behind or deeper than the practice. Practice and thing are not separate, they are fully entangled and co-constitutive. And this goes for both the ways we think about emotions as inside, and then sometimes the way that we think about software as things under the hood. But I'm actually trying to see what happens if we move to a more, to thinking about surface as a valid site of inquiry. So using the examples of the pitch correction software, Auto-Tune and Melodyne, MIDI chord packs marketed to amateur producers, and Resemble AI's voice generation tool, which you just heard some of, I offer a few windows into how emotion is explicitly encoded by programmers and promised through marketing. And I look for its implied outline in user practice, expectation, and aspiration. So now a few examples. And this work on the pitch correction software is stuff that I started working on in my dissertation, and now I'm rounding the bend on finishing my book about this, in which emotion has become a really kind of obsessive preoccupation. And yeah, so this is just for the Q&A. I'm going to really gloss this pretty quickly, but I could go on and on about either of these software if people are interested. The pitch correction software Auto-Tune was released in 1998 to almost immediate success. Of course, I don't have the space to recount its full history here, but most listeners might associate it with the warbly robotic effects it initiated in contemporary hip hop and pop, and perhaps for the very controversial position it once held and sometimes still holds in popular discourse as a tool that enabled bad singers. In the span of my 13 years of research on this software, there's one single claim that the manufacturer made in the Auto-Tune patent that stands out to me as incredibly interesting, almost inexhaustibly so, and that is that it restores emotion by fixing pitch. Auto-Tune's success is due in part to the tool's initial figuration in its patent as something that restores the emotionality of the voice when it is lost to the vagaries of performance. While this assertion has been passionately disputed by critics and listeners who hear Auto-Tune as having the exact opposite effect, so as interrupting the voice's emotionality, Antares has actively pursued a gentler, less detectable pitch correction in each of its new versions, trying to align the unmediated humanity, so to speak, that some listeners and users desire with the challenges and imperatives of vocal emotional rescue, if not generation. And these are just a couple of those tools. So the humanize knob, which was introduced in the 5th version, is meant to give a little bit more space for longer sustained notes. So instead of landing on the note right away, it takes a longer amount of time to reach the pitch center, and that makes it sound more, quote, natural and or emotional. And then flex tune, which Auto-Tune inventor Andy Hildebrand had the idea to incorporate after hearing on American Idol a slide up to a final note in the competitions. I think it was the penultimate round. So he had this thought, oh, actually Auto-Tune can't really deal with that very well. So I'm going to create this parameter that will allow for some things to be bypassed on the way to a note, and only the arrival notes will be tuned. So you can do these slides now. Let's see, where am I? Yeah, so Auto-Tune inventor Andy Hildebrand, a classically trained flute player and conservatory graduate, as well as a PhD in electrical engineering and music business enthusiast, as he told me, inherited Western classical music's long and shifting elision between intoned accuracy and authentic or effective emotionality. And here he articulated his experience in the Jacksonville Symphony Orchestra was really informative, or, you know, and I will say he's sort of a talker. So some of what I've, been working with in the interviews is to get a little bit underneath, I think, what he means. But this is one example that he gave me when I asked why he thought about intonation in this particular way. And he said to me, of course, when you play in a symphony orchestra, you have to be really well in tune or you're going to get fired. So that's the context that I understand music, and you should be in tune, or if you're not in tune, it's going to hurt some people's ears. So that obviously, he's pointing to the kind of economic consideration, maintaining employment, or, keeping your reputation in this classical music world, and how that specifically relates to intonation, if not expression. And that informing, this whole rest of his trajectory in the music software world. And so the language of the Auto-Tune patent intimates an interpolation of this at once ambiguous and specific intonation emotional valuation in Auto-Tune. So it says, the patent says, voices or instruments are out of tune when their pitch is not sufficiently close to standard pitches expected by the listener, given the harmonic fabric and genre of the ensemble. When voices or instruments are out of tune, the emotional qualities of the performance are lost. Correcting intonation, that is measuring the actual pitch of a note and changing the measured pitch to a standard, solves this problem and restores the performance. A claim like this, of course, does not emerge out of nowhere. The patent's objective sounding thesis actually requires a complex system of beliefs and materials built out of those beliefs to stabilize an ever-evolving relationship between the highly subjective phenomena of pitch and emotion in performance. Sorry, I just lost my place. It also requires an anxiety around the efficiency with which emotions might be produced. Part of what I'm arguing in my forthcoming book, Emotional Signals, is that Auto-Tune claimed to make emotions more easily available to capital by speeding up the production process. And people not only believed that, but they reproduced it in studio practice as much as in their listenings. And while the discourse largely hinged on this tension between intonation and authenticity, rarely were people asking about the kinds of effects it had on production. So the kinds of things that Michael was pointing to, I think, earlier, or about the stark distinctions that were arising in interpretations of Auto-Tune's use based on the identity of the performer. And there I'm thinking about which kinds of inflections of Auto-Tune get heard as emotional. So you have Bon Iver or somebody like Kanye West on 808s and Heartbreak as these kind of emotional opus type works, and then other inflections as being grating and annoying, not least of all when female performers use it. So there are all these, there's a kind of like schematic that I think you can apply to emotional interpretations and listening based on the identity of the performer. Sarah Ahmed offers the reminder that feelings do not exist on their own, but are produced through a concealment of their histories and production histories in particular. And media studies scholar Martin Schertzinger points out that even, or especially for companies that conduct research to make products that are globally circulating, that research is still, quote, nurtured under specifically localized socioeconomic conditions, with the result that engineers and developers become firmly embedded in equally localized social forms of human sensory engagement. People who do work to code, develop, market, and ideate software tools are entrenched in socio-emotional logics that inform their choices about what to develop in the first place. A point provided in particular relief. Okay. A point provided in particular relief if we consider the other major pitch correction software and Auto-Tune's biggest competitor, Melodyne. And actually, they both would say that they're not each other's competitors, that they're entirely different. but they are, in fact. If you Google search one, then you get like a sponsored ad for the other. So it's hard for me to believe that they're not competitors. Melodyne is a pitch and time editing software released by the very small German software company Celemony in the year 2000 and debuted at the North American Music Merchants Association meeting in Anaheim, California in 2001. And upon its release, actually, it wasn't a huge success like Auto-Tune was. There was a lot of confusion about what Melodyne could do and what its purpose was and how it sort of fit into the music software world, which lasted actually a few years. Celemony is led by inventor and self-proclaimed tinkerer and programming novice Peter Neubaker, who had hoped to make a software that could liberate sound from the fixity of recording, making it so that recordings might be a starting point for composition and not an endpoint. In the first quarter of the millennium, Melodyne, which is little known outside of audio circles, though many people here will know what it is, gained a reputation for being exceptional for the task of vocal tuning, and this is when it really took off. And that aspect of digital production for which users were most vehemently searching for what they call inaudible, sensitive, or natural solutions. So the kind of like antidote to the natural alternative to Auto-Tune, you might say. But this is not exactly a realization of Neubaker's hopes. He was very uninterested in pitch correction, but he realized its utility for keeping Melodyne alive. So he gradually accepted orienting the software in this direction, so long as the company took care to help and train higher order musical values. So I just want to highlight one, and Neubaker is kind of uncharacteristically highlighted in the Celemony webpage, and there's this 27-minute film portrait of him in which he's doing all kinds of musing about what excites him and the kinds of music that he's interested in, the kind of philosophical thought that he subscribes to. It's really, really, really interesting. But it's also pretty unusual for a software company, I think, to figure somebody in this way. And they note in a lot of their formulations on the website things like this, that it's a sense of the musical and emotional content of a recording that prevails rather than metrical levels. So there you have the metrical levels as everything that we can measure. So, if pitch, amplitude, time can all be measured, emotion exists outside of that frame, and even musicality to some degree. And that's important because it allows for this space or this kind of like non-determination that keeps the software in a more vital place that Neubaker is excited about, as opposed to this digital overdetermination that he finds to be a symptom of many, many music software. So what I argue in the book is that the concept of emotion and its exploitation is both straightforward and sonically incomprehensible, but to the trained, is at the crux of that entrainment in Melodyne. The status of emotion in Melodyne diverges from its status in Auto-Tune. It's less a principle to be protected and more of an aid for cultivating a sensibility for good musical values. Emotion is the fuzzy field of interface between the software and its user, the variable that makes room for sense instead of strict command. Sonic emotion is something for the user to learn in collaboration with the software in order to unlock a deeper musical truth that does not strictly subscribe to the logic of contemporary market demands. So by valuing emotion, users are supposed to protect musical and especially vocal sound from digital and capitalistic overdetermination. And in turn, Melodyne is meant to help them hone the skill of how to discern emotional expressivity. So the Melodyne instructional materials are here to help you. For this, the website states for these emotional qualities, there are no parameters. So instead, emotion is learned as an amorphous yet primal sensibility and an enlightened sensitivity that good learners come to grasp. Celemony's invocation of the concept of emotion is a way to both confirm the validity of the tool and to conceal the degree to which that very concept is subject to the tool's mediation. To put it another way, emotion is set up as the promise of an unmediated relationship with voice, even as it is precisely the thing that is most desperately being mediated. So I'm just going to play a little bit of this instructional video, one of many examples, just so you get a sense of the way that they
Hi, everyone.
teach you.
Rich Percenti here with another in our series. Okay, and now let's hear the pitch corrected version. Sometimes I find. Okay, nice. Is that more on the note? Yes. Does that sound better? Not necessarily. And in my opinion, no. Abby is a wonderful singer who is really bringing the full range of emotion out of this song. And this is an important thing that I wanted to discuss today, because music is not about being on or off the note. It's a whole range of emotions. It's a whole color palette we have to choose from. So moving everything to right on the center of pitch is not always necessarily the best way to work.
Okay, so there are a host of other things that encourage you to not overdo it, basically, and instead leave room for this continuous sense. So uncoincidentally, I argued this alignment with the emotional reel allowed Melodyne to more easily masquerade as nature. Like, no one talks about Melodyne. There's never been a Melodyne controversy. It sort of fades into the background when we talk about pitch correction. It's doing all the kinds of work that people ascribe to Auto-Tune, and yet it has completely bypassed any of this problematic reputation. So I think that has to do with the way that the marketing aligns it with a certain vocal nature, and it just never became entrenched in a sort of identity-based set of questions about what this does to vocality. Okay, I'm going to move on to MIDI packs now to kind of round it out. So as I wrote about recently in the book that Michael co-edited, and I really had a great time writing this piece, it pushed me in some new directions that I still feel really excited about and I'm still developing. I wrote about MIDI chord packs, the way that they offer another opportunity to explore the logics of emotion as material, economic, condition, and practice. And so I don't emphasize emotion in that piece so much, but it's there in the background. I think that there's a way you can understand how it figures in. I'll play you a little bit of a video pitching one of these packs.
What's going on, guys? Nico here. I want to thank you so much for grabbing one of my MIDI packs. In this video, we're going to break down the chord progression guide and how it's useful when using the MIDI pack. So what I've done here is I've actually taken all the chord progressions in this MIDI pack here, and I've broken them down into the different type of vibe and emotion that each of these chord progressions will give the listener. So in this PDF, which you can download in the description below, or if you've been emailed it, it has my top 20 chord progressions that I love using, and then it has every single type of chord progression in here and the vibe and emotion it brings.
Okay, so as you can see, these are almost kind of like scent profiles. Like there's like a top note and then there's something else that happens. And many of them use this word emotional combined with other things, what kind of emotion, and so on. But they're categorized so that you as the beginner user can have a sense of, you're reassured in your choice to start architecting your song. This is a starting point. So what MIDI packs promise is an avenue toward professionalization and a way to live out the fantasy of participating in a professional class of music makers. They are downloadable sets of folders, so MIDI information is in them. They're arranged into chords and progressions that a user can deploy just by dragging them into their DAW. They're not fixed sound files or samples. They're harmonic scaffolding that can be modified in order and timbre as the user wishes. So there's some room in there. So the Piano for Producers MIDI pack, which we just saw, promises, quote, 1,000 beautiful and emotional chord progressions that you've never heard before. And sorry, sometimes it when you like really revisit it, it's funny. You've never heard them before. And there are other claims to the tune of like a near unlimited amount of musical sounding chord progressions, which is another configuration I really like. And you can just access them with the click and drag of a mouse. Part of what I discuss in the chapter is how the fantasy of participation that the packs lay out preys on the shame that users and potential users accumulate as they are left out of both formal channels of music education, most especially those that would offer them the skill of or abstractly defined music theory. No one ever defines it, but you know what it is. It's effective enough on its own to just say that. And the embarrassment of having this knowledge barrier contribute to a lack of workflow that compounds as a lack of professional recognition or advancement. So here, this is the Unison MIDI chord pack, and it's pretty obvious right at the start.
Even if you don't know chords at all, you don't know anything about music theory like me, this is perfect for you.
And this is super good for you, especially if you like struggle with making melodies, chords, stuff like that.
I've been messing around with it quite a lot, and like I'll give you an example. Like you got to hear how good this sounds.
The Unison MIDI chord pack.
MIDI chord pack, and I was actually kind of blown away when I first opened it.
This has over 1,200 MIDI files that can help you make chord progressions.
It's essentially
Okay, so that abundance is all going to help you, and you will equally have this user reaction of just being blown away by what you hear. So MIDI packs would not exist without these conditions. So, you know, if you think about who is being marketed toward, who there is a presumed user in mind. If not, I mean, you know, and the companies are manufacturing that user too, but you can't prey on an anxiety that's not there. So MIDI packs like Fabler, which I started the talk with, they didn't really take off. They didn't do all that well, but they present a figure of labor saving that is supposed to expand the opportunity within the music industry to democratize it, so to speak, which is, of course, patently untrue. I think, Michael, you were kinder and you said we can discuss that, but I'm just going to say false. Instead, what they do is capitalize on precarious work and these excess desires for musical participation that are not really being met by current social infrastructure. But they also figure that participation as, yes, musical creation, but more importantly, as an avenue toward your own survival. Your creativity is figured in service of payment, streams, fame, recognition, or those things that seem to be attached to progress. So suddenly the chord progressions of the MIDI pack ring of another meaning. The instrument does more than condense the labor of making pleasant sound. It props up the fantasy of alternative professional possibility. The ease provided in the present sounds equally of movement toward an imagined future. So I'll just wrap up here. I want to make clear that by emotion, I don't so much mean an affective dimension brought about through aesthetic properties and sensory saturation. I mean the practice and contingencies of trying to confront, deny, articulate, silence, gesticulate, and sound a self within the historical and cultural contingencies of material economic context. Software abstracts these practical and material emotional negotiations and gives them a set of theoretical governing rules, which users then navigate and perhaps sometimes contest. So in summary, what would it do to enter emotions into the material frame? Can we think of them in the paradigms of resource extraction that have informed so much work in science and technology studies, history of science, and even closer to home for me, musicology? My hope is that if we venture to take that which so often passes by unnoticed, the investment in and desire for sound as emotional or to do emotional work, it will be easier to expose the revivified but so often covert essentialisms deployments of emotion permit and the conditions of labor that they hide. Because emotional formulations are frequently accompanied by very firm and at the same time unconsidered understandings of what those words might mean and the ways that they are entrenched in class, race, and gender politics. This hope is also born out just simply of the sheer consistency with which I encounter framings of software's emotional potential in my research, whether that be in studio observation work, instructional materials and videos, and marketing campaigns or listener testimonies. So by positioning emotion as software's substrate, we can consider how software not only facilitates sonic creation, but also interpellates and relies upon emotional landscapes of creators, listeners, and crucially, that fugitive figure of user. Software flourishes on both the hyperspecific, historically and culturally contingent emotional politics inhabited by their inventors and user communities, and transmutes those politics for sonic circulation. Thank you so much.
Wow. So anybody got any questions? I've certainly got one, but I'd rather get one from do you want to have a go?
I think I might be lagging a little bit. Yes, am I audible?
Oh, it's my...
Okay.
Yeah, you are now, yeah.
All right. So thank you so much for your talk. I was just very interested in the last just section that you just spoke about, which was about like emotion as a substrate, like software as a substrate, emotion as a substrate of software. And I was wondering what happens if, let's say, the encoded emotion, like in the software, is different from musicians' own emotions. Like, have you ever faced any like emotional clashes? And like,
Oh
how can
yeah.
you deal with it? Like, how do you deal with what happens?
I would say I've only encountered clashes really. I mean that there it's so infrequent that the promise of the kind of emotional translation that the software is doing is perfect. It's like it's almost never happens. But what is really interesting to me is that those the kind of like templates that are produced through the attempts at emotional. So when I'm listening to my own Fabler voice, for example, there is something that feeds back on itself. So for people who are using Auto-Tune in the studio, so one thing, that wasn't happening really at the beginning of my research in say 2010, but really is happening now, people listen to Auto-Tune in their headphones while they record. So it gives them a real-time impression of what they sound like. And what many performers say is that it makes them feel safer, less vulnerable. It allows them to be vulnerable even, like there's all this allowance that goes along with it. But it's informed by the sound. It's coming back into the loop. So I think clashes happen constantly, or just, misprogramming. Or Resemble is a great example where you can pick in that too a drop-down menu of different vibes or emotions and the ways that you want it to sound, and it's never quite right. It never really gets it right. But then you can try again, and of course there's like a learning process that goes there. But I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind, that it isn't somehow a one-to-one translation. It's almost always not working. It's almost always, it's not really doing the thing that it says it's doing something else.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I think like we kind of have to adapt to the software in such a way that, we kind of mesh with the emotions and the software as a technology, I
Yeah.
guess.
I definitely think that the practice is informed by not just those original assertions of, this sounds more emotional than this, because how did we get here? Like what Auto-Tune asserted is that performances are most emotional when they're in tune. And if you slip out of tune, then you lose the kind of je ne sais quoi emotionality of the performance. Now, of course, not everyone felt that way,
True.
but many people started to subscribe to it. And others, there's like, of course, there's an up and down, there's a sort of oscillation that happens. But I do think we incrementally moved, and this is something that Martin Scherzinger would say, is like even when we think that there's this back and forth or reactions against, we still did actually move quite far in the direction of the assumption that a perfect intonation is somehow an emotional mode expression.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question.
Well, can I get a quick one in? So in both talks, really, you've shown how enshittification driven by capitalism applied to music production tools is having some unfortunate effects. But if you were, of course, a lot of people here are researchers, developers, trying to make tools that they hope will encourage and foster, have you got any advice or insights for people making tools, I guess?
My one piece of advice, and Michael, maybe you would have a different one. This is a tall order, but my advice would be to really try to turn over any of these concepts that we take as a given. So that includes things like expression or emotion, right? So, and usually people stop there, like that's enough. There's no kind of critical step forward beyond that. So I would just say for developers, it's just good practice to think, why do I formulate this in this particular way? What is propping that up? That might just be a starting point. But otherwise, I don't really have any solutions. I don't know.
I don't have much to add either. I think I'm more just whining about about tools more than offering solutions.
I do think both of these things you've picked up on, expression and emotion, are super interesting. I always kind of worried about expression in NIME. I always thought it was far too specific a thing to have been picked on. But anyway, let's have a question from someone else. Somebody. Yes. Oh, well, I think Dennis got his hand up first, maybe, but Anish after that, maybe. Dennis, if you want to go.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. It's a question for Catherine, specifically about this framing of the chord pack as like this way to bypass the tedious work of learning music theory and jumping straight to professional success. In the music instrument industry, there's also this consideration of the customer who's like an amateur with disposable income and no career aspirations. And I'm wondering if those kinds of tools have traction from your research, if those kinds of tools have traction with those people. And if so, like why? These aren't people who are trying to quick start something, but they want to get into a flow state, they want to indulge, like the stereotypical hobbyist guitarists who play but they never record. They spend hours like as loving amateurs. And I'm wondering if chord packs and things like this work for those people.
It's such a good question. You know, I haven't really actually encountered all that many, not like in a way I have for guitarists or other instrumentalists. I haven't encountered that many like pleasure-seeking music software users that really get outside of this hope of some kind of professional prospect. So like part of what I argue in the chapter, I talk about these other chord creating instruments, the auto harp, and then the chord organ in the mid-century. And I just look at the formulation of the marketing there, and there's so much pleasure involved. Like it's supposed to actually enrich your life. It's supposed to help you like bond with your spouse, find a girlfriend, do all these things. And then what you have in the MIDI packs is like the total absence of that. There is no pleasure involved. I mean, there is in some of the reactions. Obviously, you saw one and like that's a real fun moment. You can tell the person is having a good time, or at least, you know, performing a good time. But none of the marketing is about like how good a time you'll have. It's all about how fast you'll work, how much stuff you'll make, how you'll start to get recognition from other more important producers. So it is really interesting to like think about pleasure and leisure as almost entirely gone, at least in the marketing of these things, if not the practice. But if you ever see people who are in practice having a really good time with these things, I would love to know. That would be really interesting to me.
Anish, do you want to put your question there?
Yeah, so on the topic of auto-tune and harmonizing effects, I was wondering if you ever encountered live vocal effects processors for that are like guitar pedals, but for vocals. I have a pair of those. One is an auto-tune, the other one is a harmonizer from TC Helicon, and I was wondering if you have an opinion on those and how those function as relating to your research.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they're really cool, honestly. Like they can do a lot of cool things. And I guess to not be so super pessimistic about it, I do think that there are lots of really important and interesting things that people are doing with the auto-tune voice that actually works against an essentialist frame. And that work to me is really exciting. And yeah, I think a lot of pedals and live effects can do exactly that same thing. You know, that there's like this drive to kind of explore the potentials of the voice as something liberated from, you know, the fleshy apparatus, and that that's awesome. But I guess it's not the majority of the work that I see the tools doing, even if those are the more exciting prospects. But keep it up with using. I mean, the live auto-tune thing is really fascinating too, because that can also be used in a variety of ways. One is to really naturalize your voice and kind of, you know, make it sound unmediated, or to just like lean into this hypermediated form of your live vocality. So there's a range of what can be done.
So any more questions for Catherine at this point? Oh gosh, Alvaro maybe?
Yes. Hello. Hi, Catherine. not here to this camera. Okay, so a really quick question, maybe a little bit tangential, but I'm sure that you have addressed that somehow in all your vast research. What happens with intonations that are not equal temperament?
Yeah.
Many people have said that there is where the emotion lays, and many people have said that this kind of intonation actually like spreads out poor intonations when you split up the differences with what we know about the overtones and things that produce whatever we have in cognition as intonation. So maybe you have spoken with people, especially people that generate this software. They say, okay, we're going to make your intonation perfect. When it's not perfect, it's just one type of intonation that actually spreads out poor intonation or something like that for other people, of course.
No, yeah, it's such a good question. And, so I'm working on something right now that explores this more. So this won't be in the book, but it will hopefully be an article. These are debates that aren't really new. So if you think about the just intonation, equal temperament debate, what all wrapped up in that were these questions of mood, feeling, all of these things that are kind of reconstituting now. I will say that both Melodyne and Auto-Tune have a huge range of options of alternative scales that you can use. So you can decide to exist totally outside of Western temperament, even within the software. I have very rarely seen those settings used. I mean, I'm working in the context of the US, but I think that the debate about Auto-Tune has now really extended to other parts of the globe in a more explicit way. So I have an Auto-Tune alert set up on a Google alert set up for it. And lately I've been getting tons and tons and tons of alerts about different Bollywood stars, South Asian stars who are debating the merits of Auto-Tune in that production context. So yeah, both inventors were like, yeah, well, I mean, if people want to use this other way, they can, it can do the same thing. You actually don't have to use this one tuning system. You can use the 32 that we programmed for alternate use. But people don't explore those all that much. Yeah. Maybe some artists will.
Awesome. Thank you.